Our next speaker is Annebella Pollen, okay, thank you, from University of Brighton, who will be giving a paper called Seeing Through Barbie's Solar Plexus and Mickey Mouse's Third Eye, Toy Cameras and Child Photographers. Thank you, welcome.
I hope everyone can hear me okay. Is that all right with the microphone? Great. I'm feeling very lucky to be here in California. It's about midnight, I think, in Britain. So if you're up watching this, well done. So cameras have been directed to children since the late 19th century with character marketing, an enduring feature of their address, beginning most famously with the impish fairies of the Kodak Brownie in 1900. Cameras have also been promoted as part of wider merchandising strategies in children's popular culture, from film and TV tie-ins, for example, Roy Rogers and Trigger 620 Snapshot 1950, which is here in the collection at California Museum of Photography, to pop promotions such as Spice Girls 1997 Spice Cam Polaroid. In some instances, these brand intersections seem to contribute little to the camera, as illustrated by this Barbie 110 model from the 1990s, which adds only a logo and some pinkification. However, a closer look at Barbie reveals that the doll inhabits a surprisingly photographic world. Not only is she the subject of the camera, she was launched in 1959 as a fashion model, but she's also a fashion photographer in the careers range, as well as a pet photographer, a photojournalist for National Geographic, and a baby photographer, where she offers a backstory. She says she began her professional journey by pretending to photograph with toy cameras, which is very meta. Barbie's boyfriend, Ken, took formal training in darkroom photography at college. Becky, Barbie's friend, is a school photographer, and as such, she records events and she wins competitions. Even Barbie's little sister, Skipper, is bitten by the bug, photographing outdoor escapades for her illustrated nature blog. So Barbie not only handles cameras, but also adorns functioning cameras, and she is a camera herself. In Barbie Photo Fashion 2012, a lens sits at her solar plexus, and the digital results become illustrations on her t-shirt. When this toy was introduced, it won a parenting award, but it was also the subject of moral panic. A leaked FBI document highlighted their concern that paedophiles might use the still and video cameras concealed in the doll's body to carry out crimes, even though, in fact, none had ever taken place. So I'm outlining this to you as an opening example to show how toy cameras can be children's playthings, but how they can also function as powerful sites for the projection and the interrogation of adult hopes and fears about both children and photography. And this is the focus of what I'm going to be talking about today. But before I get properly started, I wanted to propose some methodological contributions to the conference theme and to the wider project that I'm undertaking on the history of photography by children. So firstly, what might be gained by looking at children's cameras rather than looking at children's photographs? I argue that children's photography is an understudied and under-theorized area of practice, despite the enormous present-day prevalence of child-produced media. There are few celebrated child photographers historically, beyond perhaps Jacques-Henri Lartigue and the British cousins Elsie Wright and Francis Griffiths of Cottingley Fairies fame. While there have been some recent valuable projects where children's photographs have been solicited and interpreted by sociologists and artists, there remain large gaps in knowledge about how children have engaged with cameras over the last 120 plus years. So if amateur photography more broadly has taken a long time to receive any kind of cultural consecration, children's photography as a subcategory has an even lower status. Children's photographs have been inconsistently collected institutionally and are barely visible before the 1970s, but the same cannot be said of children's cameras. These have a small but notable place in international museum collections. They are given greater attention than the photographs that they produce. Secondly, doing a camera-centered history of photography may also necessitate putting aside the photographer, which works well in my case of toy cameras that I will be discussing later, as the child photographer is frequently figured as an imagined concept, constituted through discourse and spoken for, rather than a real person whose experience is acknowledged and valued. The absence of children's voices in the historical record more broadly is a key methodological concern among scholars of childhood studies who have reflected, for example, in this 2018 edited collection on the left of the screen, not only on the relative paucity of historical sources by children, but also on the theoretical impossibility of directly reading experience or voice from those that do exist. And that term impossibility is a salient one, and it echoes Jacqueline Rose's influential 1984 book on Peter Pan, where she argues for the impossibility of children's fiction, as it is written by adults for adult consumers who through it construct their preferred version of childhood, which they then impart to children. Now, neither of these texts mention cameras, but I think their arguments can be productively applied. In the case of Rose, very literally, the word photography can be substituted for fiction in many of her statements, and their meaning will still stand. So, for example, she writes, children's fiction sets up a world in which the adult comes first, brackets, author, maker, giver, and the child comes after, brackets, reader, product, receiver. And this works as well, I think, with the concept of children's photography, which also creates a world in which the adult precedes as inventor, manufacturer, provider, and the child follows as receiver, user, and producer. In children's cameras, as in children's fiction, adult concerns are preeminent. Looking at children's cameras, then, I want to suggest that we might concur with scholars of children's books that they don't really belong to children at all. So I'm going to test this argument out today for the rest of the time in my talk by looking at another highly merchandised American figure who inhabits another complex photographic universe, and that's Mickey Mouse. So first introduced as a cartoon character in 1928, by the early 1930s, Mickey Mouse's likeness was being licensed across an enormous range of products, and some of the earliest visualized Mickey as a photographer, such as his jigsaw from 1933. By 1934, however, the mouse had a camera of his own. The Ensign camera was a simple box device constructed mainly of wood and covered with a patterned black fabric, which was embossed with the mouse's name. This and the tacked on Mickey motif were all that distinguished the camera from others with similar mechanisms. By way of contrast, however, the Mickey Mouse camera that I'm going to focus on from here dramatically used Mickey Mouse's form as its plastic casing. Micromatic, produced in 1971 by child guidance toy manufacturers in the Bronx, New York, had a lens in Mickey's nose, a viewfinder in his forehead, and a shutter release at his temple. The camera took easy-to-load 126 cartridge film, made popular by Kodak's Instamatic, hence Micromatic's hybrid name. The Micromatic camera was a striking novelty in its own time. It was included, for example, in Hocus Focus, a 1977 compendium of the world's weirdest cameras, and it continues to attract attention among collectors long after it ceased production. For example, a very similar photograph of Micromatic in a child's hands covering a child's face launches the 2014 book Camera Crazy. Two rather different Micromatic portraits in my next slide. So in 1971, in the year of the camera's release, Stephen Shaw, the photographic artist of the American vernacular, used the character camera to help him take candid photographs of strangers without intimidation. He said, "I discovered early on that the camera I use affects the picture, that particular cameras lend themselves to particular kinds of photography." He said, "When you do portraits with a Micromatic, your subject is always smiling because they're looking at the big plastic head of Mickey Mouse." His 1971 self-portrait on the left, aged 24, shows a Micromatic at groin level against Shaw's naked body. Its low-quality fuzz and reflected flash were part of its cut-loose subversive message. And the photograph of Shaw on the right was taken aged 71 at his 2018 MoMA retrospective, where, in fact, a Micromatic was also on display. So the 1970s experiments that Shaw undertook were part of a broader creative movement. As the artist Don Sear explained in a 1977 issue of Popular Photography magazine, a quiet revolution was taking place in the wings of photodom, he said. Despite the ever more sophisticated camera hardware that was available, he observed, quote, "Some photographers are putting aside their expensive equipment and giving special attention to what the trade might call Mickey Mouse cameras," end quote. Mickey Mouse, when used as an adjective here, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, implies the trivial and the inconsequential, the worthless and the childish. Sear's Mickey Mouse cameras were not necessarily Micromatics, but a related category of camera that he said the photographic industry never intended for the serious user. They were designed primarily as novelty items, either to be given away or used as sales gimmicks or sold as toys. Diana was the prime example. The plastic-bodied 120 film using Hong Kong imports, whose cheap production led to a lack of control that could be artistically liberating. Sear described the Diana as a guessomatic. He felt that the errors it produced could express a new kind of vision. Sear was both an artist and an educator, and toy cameras also figured prominently in his 1977 book, Teach Your Child Photography, including on the cover. Photographic literature is littered with how-to books. A subcategory of this material addresses children, and I'm showing you here a small selection from my own collection, which is forming an important part, an important historic source in my investigation of how children have been imagined as photographers. Sear doesn't address children directly in his book, but his conceptualization of how children see and how this aligns with the camera is distinctive. He even offers a philosophy of consciousness and a manifesto for a holistic society aligned with countercultural thinking and utilizing its parlance. So the book developed actually from Sear's Popular Photography article series, which was tellingly entitled How to Turn Your Kid On to Photography. Sear argued in his book regarding tuning in and turning on. He said, "Children are more aware of the here and now and more in tune with it than most adults. As they grow up," he said, "they learn to tune out, a sheer survival mechanism in today's world." And from this, he reverse engineered the adult photographer's search for free expression back onto the child, saying, "If we try, we can help children keep that childlike vision that so many adult artist photographers seem to reclaim only after many years of search and hard work." So childlike vision was to Sear visionary with privileged access to an artistic consciousness. Theirs is the gift of serendipity, Sear claimed. Children, he said, seem to have a natural aptitude for making unusual pictures quite by accident, whereas adults needed to break what he called psychological closures and to shatter the limits of our vision. He said children do not have to contend with the visual encumbrances of half a lifetime. He argued that photography can be a truly synesthetic experience, producing moments of heightened consciousness, and children, he felt, enjoy this phenomenon more than adults. So Sear's child is somewhat guru-like, but his text, Teach Your Child Photography, was grounded by practical photographic exercises. His how-to photographs were often modeled with children's hands, and the book was illustrated with their photographs, sometimes of toys, taken with toy cameras. They demonstrated the results. So the child's camera in Sear's book was a tool for self-realization. And Sear recommended that educators following in his footsteps buy Dollar Dianas by the crate from the Workshop for Learning Things, a radical enterprise dedicated to new approaches to schooling, or rather deschooling. The Workshop for Learning Things featured in the Big Rock Candy Mountain an educational extension of the much better known Whole Earth catalogue in the early 1970s. Its pages were produced in the same style and format as the Whole Earth catalogue, but its focus was on educational resources for inner growth. The editors argued, quote, self-knowledge has been limited to mysticism, psychoanalysis, and various beyond the fringe activities. As a result, we are left empty by the present educational process, both in and out of school, end quote. So photography for children was included in this magazine's remit, with processes described in child-friendly language. For example, film is an amazing thing. Like a piece of bread and jam, it has two parts. The bread part, made of clear plastic, is called the base. It holds the jam part, which is called the emulsion. I love that quote. Articles on photography's mystic powers, such as in Zen and the Art of Photography, claimed a camera is an extension of ourselves, an appendage to bring us closer to the universe. So this countercultural conception of the child with direct access to higher states explains the positive attributes ascribed to children's cameras by adults. In the toy camera compilation, Camera Crazy, for example, I showed you earlier, children barely figure, except as stand-ins for spontaneity and simplicity, qualities to which the authors hope that adult users of toy cameras might be so lucky as to surrender. This motif of the uniquely creative child is appealing, but it's worth remembering that it's a cultural fabrication, one of many interchangeable adult conceptions of the child who operates as a carrier for an enormous range of social and cultural meanings and ideological investments. Amy Ogata has shown how the apparently ageless idea of the naturally creative child has been historically produced. She shows how this American belief, quote, mushroomed from the province of the psychologist and progressive preschools of the interwar era to become a widespread and cohesive national value by the mid-70s, end of quote. And design historians of childhood, Juliet Kinchin and Aidan O'Connor, in their book, The Century of the Child, attest to this concept's popularity with countercultural makers and media theorists alike. So, for example, the Austrian-American Victor Papanek, in his 1971 book, Design for the Real World, declared, quote, the mysterious quality called creative imagination seems to exist in all people, but it is severely diminished by the time an individual reaches the age of 6. And in the same years, Marshall McLuhan argued for new tech for new times. He said, to expect a turned-on child of the electric age to respond to the old educational modes is like expecting an eagle to swim. It's simply not within his environment and therefore incomprehensible. So, some final thoughts then to wrap up. We might not expect an eagle to swim, but neither might we expect a mouse to take photographs. In my title, I referred to Mickey Mouse's third eye, and that was both a poetic attempt to explain the position of the Micromatic viewfinder and an evocation of the cosmic consciousness that was attributed to children in the period and the place where this camera was produced. Yet Micromatic possesses further fantastical qualities, for he also speaks. On the reverse, the mouse addresses children directly. Treat me gently, he urges. I'm your pal. Philosophers of dolls over the last 2 centuries have spilt much ink on the child's seemingly uncanny capacity to imagine inanimate playthings into life. Charles Baudelaire even used photographic metaphors when he wrote in 1853, quote, all children talk to their toys, he said. The children become actors in the great drama of life, scaled down inside the camera obscura of the childish brain, end quote. But adults too share in this investment, having long imagined the fetishized commodity of the camera as a living doll with all-seeing eyes and mechanical agency, most literally seen here in caricatures from the 1840s and 1850s. And this brings me back to my opening gambit, where I adapted the words of literary critic Jacqueline Rose, substituting my photographic terms for her denouncement of the category of children's fiction. And I do so again for my final word. So instead of asking what children want or need from cameras, I ask, what is it that adults, through cameras, want or demand of the child? Thank you.